You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly. You have successfully joined the webcast. Please stand by. The meeting will begin shortly.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Coomer, and before I call this meeting to order, I'd just like to note for the record that I am serving this morning as acting chair of today's meeting at the request of AYCDC staff. I now call to order the meeting of the directors of the Atlantic Yards Community Development Corporation for Tuesday, April 11, 2023. I'd like to note for the record this meeting is being webcast. The directors have received relevant materials in advance of today's meeting, are free to ask questions at any time. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome two new members to our board, Anand Amin, who was recommended to serve by the mayor of New York City, and Ronald Schiffman, who was recommended to serve by Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso. Welcome, and I'm exercising chair's prerogative to give them each a couple of brief opportunity to introduce themselves and to tell us what you do when you're not attending AYCDC.
Thanks, Daniel. My name's Anand Amin. I'm Senior Advisor for Real Estate in the Mayor's Office. I have a background in real estate and planning and have worked at various different city agencies from HPD, city planning, and NYCHA. Looking forward to serving on this board. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Ron Schiffman. I teach at Pratt Institute. I founded in the early 60s the Pratt Center for Community and Environmental Development, which I think is the oldest community technical assistance center that's still in existence. I also served on the New York City Planning Commission from 1990 to 1996. I was appointed by David Dinkins to as a member of the City Planning Commission. I'm now Professor Emeritus at Pratt.
Thank
and
you.
I served on the board of Develop, Don't Destroy, which was a group that was very concerned with the development around Atlantic Yards.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you both have extraordinarily relevant experience that we'll be calling upon in our meetings. Consistent with the policy of our parent corporation, we welcome public comment on the following agenda. After each item is presented, any comments are received from directors. We'll allow members of the public to provide comments. All comments should be limited, if possible, to 2 minutes and should only address the item that is then under consideration on the agenda. You'll note that the final item on our agenda today is titled Public Comments. At that time, we'll have an opportunity for members of the public to provide comments on non-agenda related matters. Please keep in mind it's our intention to try to conclude today's meeting by 11:30 a.m., which is our allotted time. I'd now like to ask the directors whether anyone has any potential conflict of interest with respect to any of the items on the agenda. If so, I'd ask you to please make an appropriate disclosure on the record at this time. We'll then be sure that you may recuse yourself from any discussion or vote with regard to such item or items. Does anyone have any conflict of interest? Hearing none, I would now call upon Toby Jayasimi to present the first item on today's agenda. Thank you. Which is a request for approval of the corporation's fiscal year 2023-2024 annual operating budget.
Good morning.
Just a moment.
Could I just ask for a point of order? We did not receive any minutes from the June 7th meeting. Was there a reason why we didn't get minutes from the June 7th meeting?
Sure. The transcript is still with our court reporter, the stenographer that prepares the transcript. And once that's been received, we'll work on the minutes and prepare it to the directors.
Okay. I mean, that meeting took place quite some time ago.
Yeah. There are a number of different subsidiary meetings that occur, and our corporate secretary and legal team walks through that process of reviewing the transcripts as they are received, prepares the draft minutes for review, and then presents them to the directors for approval. So we'll be sure to flag that for the next directors' meetings. Yeah. But the webcast of the meeting is available on ESD's website, so a record of it is publicly available.
Yeah, so I think, by next meeting, hopefully we can have minutes of that meeting and this meeting so that we can approve them at that time.
Yep.
Thank you.
It's a fair question. Thanks. So, budget. Toby?
Good morning, directors. Today you're being asked to approve the corporation's fiscal year 2023-2024 operating budget, which proposes a total of $221,567 in personnel services. This covers the salaries for the AYCDC project team and the fringe benefits associated with that, and a total of $28,433 in non-personnel services, primarily insurance purposes and also office occupancy cost. The directors will notice a change in the allocation for the insurance cost. Our budget team has flagged that the change in allocation for the insurance cost reflects a change in the estimate that was provided to us for the previous fiscal year versus the anticipated cost for this coming fiscal year. So that change is reflected in this operating budget. Typical to the process, the operating budget allows for the operation of the AYCDC and also meets the requirements that we're able to provide the services for the costs associated with the operation of the subsidiary. And the operating budget is fully funded by the cost agreement that ESD has with the development team. So all of these funds are provided for via the cost agreement between the project's developer and Empire State Development. Happy to answer any questions.
I think, does anyone have any questions? I think this is a couple points, and I think important to note for clarity. The fact that this comes out flat year to year is not a miracle of budgeting, as I understand it. It's pursuant to that cost agreement you just mentioned that has an escalating cost allowance, and that the developer agrees to pay, and it's flat now at $250 through what? Through when?
Currently through 2025 or 2026, if I recall correctly.
All right. And despite the reduction in insurance, I think we can all be safely assured that we're adequately covered for
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that's correct.
For any slips and falls that might occur in this room while we're meeting, or any actions against directors, among other things. Any questions on the budget before we, or comments before we proceed to adopt it?
I have one question because,
Sure.
and excuse me, I'm relatively new.
You're very new.
I would like to know what the functions of the office are between meetings, and what is the relationship between staff and the developers, and how do we make sure that we're being updated carefully on the progress, particularly around affordable housing?
Sure, that's a good question, and thank you for inquiring about that, Professor Schiffman. Hold on. I call you Professor Schiffman by habit, out of respect for your background. So the Atlantic U.S. Community Development Corporation is a subsidiary of Empire State Development and was established to serve in an advisory capacity to the ESD Board of Directors. The AYCDC itself, as a corporation, as an entity, serves in support of the work that the ESD project team does. So I fall under one of the staff members that are reflected in the operating budget, but I serve as both liaison to the AYCDC directors, available to answer your questions and provide updates on the project status. So you'll receive the construction reports that are prepared by ESD's owner's representative. You'll also receive the reports from our mitigation monitor, an environmental consultant, that monitors the construction activity that happens on site, as well as updates from what occurs during our public engagement efforts, namely quality of life meetings or engagement with key community stakeholders. And then that relationship is also established with the project team that includes the project director, it includes the legal team, it includes environmental review team, and also those who monitor construction activity and oversight of the work that happens on site. And then there's, of course, the business negotiation and engagement with the developer as well, with regards to ensuring their compliance with the project's requirements and project obligation. So all of that happens via relationship with the various members of the project team. I happen to serve in the role of project director and also serving as a liaison with the AYCDC as well. So outside of just engaging with the directors and the necessary board meetings, there's also the regular day-to-day activity of monitoring the work that happens on site and engaging with the development team to ensure their compliance with the project's requirements.
Is it your intention to meet with the AYDC board prior to any agreements with the developers around the issues of compensation or meeting their obligations?
Sure. So any proposed changes to the general project plan, any proposed changes to the project's governing documents would require a public review process to the GPP more specifically, and any actions that would go before the ESD board for approval or for authorization would require to come before the AYCDC for consideration and recommendation first. And so if some directors who were on may recall, in 2019, there were proposed modifications to the general project plan related to various project sites. And before that action was taken to the ESD board of directors, it was first brought to the AYCDC for consideration and recommendation. And then the AYCDC are able to take a vote recommending or not recommending the staff presented action, and then that is taken to the ESD board. So any action that goes before the ESD directors related to the general project plan and related to the Atlantic Yards project is first brought to the AYCDC for consideration.
Thanks, that was helpful.
I have a question.
Sure.
Who is the other staff person?
Sure, we have, well, there our other full-time staffers, a gentleman by the name of Greg Lynch. Greg is on site and walks the project's perimeter numerous times a day and helps to serve as ESD's additional eyes and ears on the project site. And the staff cost also covers other aspects of the project's team's time working on the Atlantic Arts project.
Thank you.
As I understand it, ESD staff will if they do say they're doing a discrete project or some discrete task relating to the Atlantic Yards, they'll kind of bill their time to this project. So it can be, it's not like it's either dedicated full time or half time.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if this is a good time to bring it up, but there's some extra work that needs to be done to get this project moving.
There sure is.
Okay.
Yes. I think we're going to be starting that conversation this morning. But while we're on the budget, if there are no more questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. I'd like to call on Toby now to provide us with a corporate update, which is presented for our information only, and there won't be any vote required.
Good morning again, directors. Just give me a minute here to be both presenter and offer technical. There we go. First, wanted to thank you all for making yourselves available for this morning's meeting. As you know, we've attempted to schedule this meeting for a few dates now in anticipation of being able to meet in March before the close of the fiscal year, but we appreciate you adjusting your schedules and personal commitments to be with us here today. As the acting chair referenced, we have two new appointees from the mayor's office and also from the Brooklyn Borough President's office. I want to thank the former appointees, Lee Wachowski from the mayor's office and Cy Richardson from the Brooklyn Borough President's office for their time on the board and their expertise and knowledge that they've shared with us during their time of service. The updates on the project will reflect construction updates at the B12 and B13 sites, which have the address of 595 Dean Street. We'll touch on the status of the discussions around the platform construction for Block 1120 and Block 1121. We also have answers to some questions that were raised by the directors in advance of today's meeting, as well as provide a community relations update. Before moving ahead, you guys might notice a new face at the table. I'd like to introduce Arden Saklo, who serves as Executive Vice President of Real Estate and Planning here at ESD. Arden has been in her position for about 6 months now and takes on a role that was held by Holly Like, who has transitioned from ESD. Again, just doing some placemaking. This is the project map that offers us context of where we are. On the project map, a total of 8 of these buildings have been completed or very close to substantial completion. So working from the Barclay Center, we have 461 Dean, which is B2, 38 6th Avenue, which is B3. We have in the red there B4, which is 18 6th Avenue. And we have B15, which is 664 Pacific Street, which also has at the base of it a DOE public middle school that is currently being fit out by the School Construction Authority. And then moving further east, we have 535 Carlton Avenue, which is B14, B13, and B12, which are in the blue and are under development by TF Cornerstone, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, are near substantial completion. And then we have B11, which is 550 Vanderbilt, which is also completed and fully occupied. The balance of the project site, which is Site 5 and B5 through B10, we'll also reference shortly. So when we last met in June 2022, B12 and B13, as you can see, we're still completing the facade work. And now in March 2023, the building has received its first full set of temporary certificates of occupancy. And there is work ongoing, as you can see at the bottom there, for completion of the open space. And just jumping back here, the open space at B12 and B13 is being completed, as well as marrying the temporary open space between 535 Carlton Avenue and 550 Vanderbilt Avenue. Upon completion of the open space at B12 and B13, we'll have a total of approximately 3 acres of open space delivered on Block 1129. Then the balance of the 5 acres of the total 8 acres that are expected at the project site would be delivered along B5 and B10 over the platform sites. And so we expect for the affordable housing lottery for B12 and B13 to open in the coming weeks. The developer, TF Cornerstone, is working through their final approvals with HPD, which is the Housing Preservation Development Agency, necessary for the marketing of these units. Those interested in getting more information about the lottery may visit 595deanlottery.com or the city's Housing Connect portal, which is housingconnect.nyc.gov. The applications are submitted via the Housing Connect portal, and folks who are also interested in other affordable housing lotteries across the city may visit that site for information as well. Both B12 and B13 will deliver a total of 798 units at 30% affordable, which equals to 240 units of affordability. Again, the open space that would be delivered at the project site will include a dog run, a children's play area, active and passive uses space, so opportunities for seating or lounging, an opportunity for walkways through the portions of the site that will remain open. And then as the balance of the project sites are delivered, those additional open space areas will be made available to the public. If you recall, the board had also made consideration back in 2019 related to below grade use to allow for an indoor recreational facility at the bottom of B12 and B13. So we expect that the Chelsea Piers Fitness Center and recreational facility will be open also in the summer and available to the public. So moving ahead, I wanted to flag also that there was a request to have the Long Island Railroad present for this meeting, but due to scheduling conflict, the Long Island Railroad wasn't able to be present, but we will coordinate to ensure that for the next meeting there's an opportunity to have a representative there present. And also on the development side, Scott Solish, who had served as Executive Vice President for Greenland USA, has transitioned from the firm, and we are coordinating with the developer to ensure that there is representation moving forward as they work through their project team. There was also a scheduling conflict on their end as well, but we thought it was best to move forward with this meeting since we were able to get quorum with the directors, and happy to answer questions or facilitate dialogue as necessary there. Transitioning to the status of the platform, as you know, about a year ago, the developer made a public presentation ready to be able to commence work on the platform construction at Block 1120. So Block 1120 is the first section of the platform, and it describes the blocks along Atlantic Avenue between 6th Avenue and Carlton Avenue. So that's what we call Block 1120, and then the balance of the platform sites is Block 1121, which would follow from Atlantic Avenue, from Carlton to Vanderbilt Avenue. And so about a year ago, the developer made public presentation ready to commence work on the platform construction. They'd offered drawings and information to the community that detailed the changes to vehicular and pedestrian flow of traffic as the work commenced. However, the developer continues to be in negotiations with the Long Island Railroad with regards to the commencement of the platform construction and the permits necessary to advance the work. And there are some questions that came in from the directors, specifically with regards to the details on the air rights, which are payments that the developer is required to make to the MTA and the Long Island Railroad, specifically for the ability to develop over the permanent yards. And so first question that was raised was the 2009 agreement with the MTA established a total cost for the air rights over the rail yard of $80 million as of January 1st, 2010, with an interest rate of 6.5% per year. Has that agreement been modified since, and if so, what are the current terms? Per the Long Island Railroad and the MTA, the 2009 air rights agreement has not been modified. And following to that, the agreements have not been modified, and the developer is current on their payments to the MTA for the air right payments. do you have any follow-up questions on that? I just wanted to confirm that.
No, I appreciate that. I just, for the benefit of the directors, the total amount, given the 6.5% interest rate that Toby mentioned, the total cost from the period of all payments is $173,500,000.
And that payment would run through approximately 2030, 2031, depending on the schedule of payments. And so to date, the developer is current in those payments to the MTA. And again, they're in ongoing discussions with the MTA about the platform construction work. And we are encouraged by the progress in the negotiations, even though it has taken quite some time. We recognize the importance of the start of the platform work to be able to deliver on the balance of the project sites. As I presented earlier, the balance of the project sites, B5 through B10, would be developed over the platform, in addition to Site 5, which is located across the street from the Barclays Center and is the current site of the PC Richards and the former site of the Modell Sporting Goods store. So,
Toby, if I could ask a question, have they
Sure.
given a forecast on when they intend to start and what the completion might be?
Sure, that's a good question. So given that the developer had made public presentations last year, again, with construction, fencing permits already achieved, and received, the developer is ready to commence work as soon as they've wrapped up their negotiations and discussions with the Long Island Railroad and received the necessary permits from the Long Island Railroad to be able to advance the work. They've gotten the necessary contractors and have their team, I guess, ready to be able to move forward with the work, but it's subject to receiving the approvals from the MTA to be able to commence work and have the necessary agreements in place. As it relates to the schedule and the timeline for the platform, so it would be the platform would be developed in phases, and each super block, so block 1120 and block 1121, would be the portions that house six of the buildings that would be developed, so B5 through B10. And right now, once the developer is able to commence work on the platform, they'd start on the base of what would be the base of B5, and then commence that portion of the platform, and then move on to the base of what would be B6, and then B7, thereby completing block 1120, and then moving on to the next portion eastward, completing the base for B8, 9, and 10. And so the phasing of that work, once they're able to commence construction, allows for there to be the start of work on the platform and then progress enough to start on the vertical overbuild for the buildings over the site as well. But the timing, again, would be dependent on when they get the necessary approvals from the Long Island Railroad.
They started making the payments, and when did they start?
2012. So
Yeah.
They've been making payments for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Were those contingent on receiving a permit from the LIRR?
The general project plan and their agreements with the LIRR is contingent upon not just the permanent work that has been done to improve the rail yard, which, as you can see on the site here, has been a new retaining wall, a new access portal, new electrical substation, maintenance and operations facilities for the LIRR. So all of that is part of the agreement that the developer has with the MTA, which is further complicated than negotiations.
Is contractually required to ultimately provide this permit, the necessary permit.
That's correct.
So I guess it's a little bit in tension with the notion that they're still negotiating over a permit that they're required to provide.
That's correct.
do we have a sense of what the nature of the negotiation is? I mean, as Daniel pointed out, this was agreed in 2009. It was 14 years ago, and they've already paid, I believe, a little over $85 million.
That's correct.
What is outstanding at this point with the MTA that's preventing the project from moving forward?
Sure, that's a good question. ESD isn't party to the full details of the negotiations because the developer has a separate project agreement with the MTA and with the Long Island Railroad on the work at the permanent yards and also the design and construction for the platform. But the negotiations have ranged from various engineering questions and various questions about how it is that the construction work will be phased, to also the developer's guarantee and the necessary financial structure of what the agreements would be to be able to allow for the platform work to continue. And so the developer discussions with the MTA ranges from kind of looking from a micro perspective of the specific project sites and the details and the complexities of engineering at each aspects of the platform, to a macro discussion of what it looks like to get from the start of construction to the completion of the platform once the last vertical build is completed.
I think it's very, very important for us to have an understanding of what's holding up the MTA negotiation, because we have a problem here. This project has a responsibility to complete another 877 units of affordable housing by 2025. I mean, it's just a little more than 2 years, actually. And there's no potential that this platform where these units are supposed to be can be built in that time. And there are some very significant liquidated damages that have been agreed upon for every unit that's delayed. So, I mean, the only thing I was able to find that's been publicly made available that talks about the length of construction is a memo that Jones Lang LaSalle wrote for the U.S. Immigration Fund in 2018. And it looks like that first platform they estimated about 3 years. It might be possible to build, I don't really know, but I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any potential at all for these apartments to be ready in 2 years and a month. And that will mean that the developer will begin to be responsible for about $1.8 million a month in liquidated damages that goes on in perpetuity. What's ESD's position about collecting those remedies? We've been in this room before at previous board meetings and have heard representatives from Empire State Development claim that the remedies are non-negotiable, that they're going to be collected, and that's the incentive to get the project done. Is that still the agency's perspective?
The project documents haven't changed, so the requirements on the project are still the same. We recognize where we are with the developer's ongoing discussions with the MTA as it relates to the platform, which is critical for the delivery of the balance of the buildings for B5 through B10. But at this time, there have been no changes to the project document, so those obligations are still standing.
I would like to propose, subject to any further comments or objections from the director, that we request our staff to request that at our next meeting, persons of sufficient authority and ability to provide relevant information be present from both the MTA and the developer to tell us about the status of those discussions and a firm timeline for when they will be completed and when the permitting will be issued, so that we have a, because right now it's a bit of a staring into a black hole, we need more information on the status, and of course we'd be happy to hear a report at our next meeting that the permit's been issued and that there's a date for commencement of construction, and perhaps that will maybe light a little extra fire under the process. But we want to hear a public report. Does anyone have any comment on that?
I agree, and I want to also say that I think that meeting needs to take place in the relatively near future, certainly within the scope of the quarterly schedule we're supposed to be observing. We haven't met in almost a year, and I don't see how another year could go by and have this situation be unresolved. I'm interested in all the things that Dan is interested in. I'm also very interested in understanding from the developer where the situation with the performance remedies will leave them at this point. That's a tremendous obligation that now is going to come due in a relatively short period of time.
Sure.
Probably isn't in their budget.
Yeah, all of these requests are well noted, and we'll coordinate both with the director's availabilities to be able to ensure that we have a quorum, as well as having representatives from the development team and the MTA as well.
I concur with the two previous speakers, but I have one concern, and that is concerned about the developer themselves. How viable are they, given the present market situations that exist here and abroad? And are we in any way assessing that beforehand so that we have options available to us so that we don't have to react at the last minute, so that we evaluate how viable they are over time, given the various different circumstances that may arise?
Thank you for that.
I guess
Yes, my request, which I think is everyone concurs with, is predicated on the assumption that we will try to meet, sometime in the next quarter. And I'd ask all directors to
Would it be possible
be
to
flexible
send
with
the
their
schedule?
schedules.
Yeah, we will typically we'll send out the forecast updates for the calendar year, and I'll coordinate with our board's corporate secretary to put together some dates so that folks are able to make adjustments as necessary or hold the time on their calendars, and then we'll coordinate, of course, with the MTA and with the development team to ensure that they're available as well.
Do we need to wait for the next quarterly meeting? Can we do it in between, even if it's a virtual call?
Our meetings will have to be in person, given the direction that guides all ESD subsidiaries, but we'll find a date as soon as possible and coordinate with the team on that.
So in other words, we are looking for next meeting date before or by July.
We'll make that known.
Thank you.
Should hopefully be doable.
Happy to continue this discussion, but just wanted to flag quickly as well that since the directors' meeting, there have been 3 quality of life meetings in July, September, and February. You'll notice the gap between the September and February meetings. Those were as a result of scheduling conflicts, both for ESD project team as well as representatives from the development team, in ensuring that and also the holidays. Once you really go past the middle of November, it gets really hard to find a time that doesn't conflict with a holiday or other community meetings. And so there have been July and September and February meetings. And an overview of some of the discussion topics that have come up has been the status of the middle school, which I referenced, which is at the base of 664 Pacific Street. The developer has turned over the site at Core and Shell to the School Construction Authority, and fit out of the school space is ongoing. We have no updates yet in terms of when the school will be open. There have been reports that it will be academic year 2025, but we'll confirm that information. And there's also a request from members of the public to have representatives from the Department of Education available at a quality of life meeting to answer questions around how the opening of the school will be managed and what impacts that will have to the local community in terms of pickup and drop-offs and crossing guards, et cetera, various points about the operations of the school space in the community. So we flagged that request, and we'll be sure to facilitate the public meeting as requested by members of the community. There was also questions and discussions around the Barclays Center Plaza restoration work. Last summer, the Barclays Center carried out some improvements on the Arena Plaza to replace some of the paving and lighting fixtures that were damaged as a result of wear and tear, and also due to a lot of the civic engagement activity that occurred on the plaza site in the summer of 2020. As we've just spent time discussing, there have been questions raised by members of the community around the Long Island Railroad platform construction status, as well as the Block 1129 open space. So again, that open space is the portion that's along Dean Street and Pacific Street between Carlton Avenue and Vanderbilt Avenue. And again, once those portions of open space are completed in the coming weeks, we'll have approximately 3 acres of open space available to the public, which will include children's play area, dog run, opportunities for seating and walkways that will be publicly available. As I referenced earlier, there were questions around the B12 and B13 affordable housing lottery, as well as the project's affordable housing obligation site-wide, questions around neighborhood cleanliness and the schedules for trash pickups, activities by the Department of Sanitation, as well as the quality of life meeting schedule and format. Currently, the quality of life meetings are held virtually via the Zoom platform, and there's some interest in considering either a hybrid model or other forms of engagement for the quality of life meetings, and all of those are under consideration, and we're happy to provide updates accordingly. So I'll stop sharing and happy to answer any additional questions from the directors.
So a couple of things. First, I'm going to go back to 595 Dean, and this is really just for the benefit of the other directors, some of them who are newer to the project. The affordable units at 595 Dean are being subsidized through Affordable New York Option C, which is 130% AMI. So that's about $135,000, $140,000 for a family of three. That's almost a market rate apartment. The project agreements allow up to 165% of AMI to be considered affordable housing. So this is really, I mean, it's not the developer's fault. They're performing according to the agreements and state law, but the project was structured in a way that today, given the change in AMI, doesn't really deliver housing that's very affordable. There's also no community preference at Atlantic Yards anymore. Affordable housing at Atlantic Yards, when it was originally started, was subject to 50% preference for community boards 2, 3, 6, and 8, but that ended when the 421A expired in 2016, and it was not made a part of the new 421A that came since then. So not only isn't the housing particularly affordable, it's also not actually preferencing the communities around the project anymore. The other thing I wanted to mention, jumping to the end with quality of life, there's a major water and sewer project that's going in on Dean Street right now between 6th Avenue and Vanderbilt Avenue, and it's going to have, it's being implemented largely because of the additional capacity for the sewer required for Atlantic Yards buildings. It will have a major impact on businesses on Vanderbilt Avenue. The construction liaison has told about a dozen restaurants there to expect water shutoffs from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. in the months of July and August, which makes it impossible to run a restaurant. So that's something that the city council member and DDC are trying to work through. And it's, again, it's not the fault of the developer or the state, but it is a major environmental impact and economic impact that was not factored in to any analysis of this project.
Is there any ability to get business interruption compensation from any either agency or developer?
From what I've understood from talking to the restaurant owners, business interruption insurance doesn't play here. And there's no compensation available from the city of New York either. We had SBS on the phone talking about this as well. They don't provide any kind of compensation in this regard. So this is kind of an ongoing and unresolved issue, but it's unfortunate because obviously the capacity was known for a long time since the project was approved 17 years ago. And I would suspect, I mean, they're giving a timeline of 2 years right now, but these projects don't tend to perform on their exact timeline because of field conditions and the like. So there's kinds of things you were mentioning about the school being impacted, and traffic and drop-offs and stuff. There's a good potential that will still be going on by the time the school opens. They gave a 2-year timeline, but these projects don't typically finish in their initial schedule.
Just to piggyback on Kip, well, for the purpose of that project, did the city ever give ESD or the board anything as far as any upcoming projects or work schedules that were happening in and around the project? Just so this way.
I believe there was coordination, or there was at least notice provided to the local community, and also notice provided as it related to, there was some sidewalk improvement work that needed to have been done at 595 Dean Street to allow for restoring pedestrian access along the north side of Dean on the project site. And so I believe there was notice as the developer went to get their necessary permits for that work. And the forecast for the DDC infrastructure improvement work has been delivered for some time, but the coordination of timing, again, has been subject to when the agency was able to go out to do the work.
Subject to correction once we get the minutes of the last meeting. I have a vague recollection
Yeah.
that this came up at the last meeting.
I'd like to go back to the issue of 130% of median income, because the levels of income that are now...
That's option C is 130%.
But I'm just concerned that that's too high, that we really, when this thing was debated originally, and the commitments made to ACORN and the community benefits agreement, the idea of affordability was at a much lower level. And I think we have to figure out how we urge the developer and urge local governments to meet that original obligation rather than to continue at the rate that's occurring. Otherwise, we're going to have an economically segregated community.
Well, in fact, Affordable New York has sunset as well. So there is no tax abatement currently in the state of New York. So even the 130% AMI would not apply. And today, if a building went up at Atlantic Yards, it would likely, the affordable units would be at 165% AMI, because that's what the maximum allowed in the project agreements is.
That has to be worked on.
I'd like to go back to something that Ron mentioned earlier about the developer's capacity. This is the second developer at Atlantic Yards. The first developer was Forest City Radnor, who is no longer in business largely because of the management of Atlantic Yards. In fact, their parent company was acquired by Brookfield. So effectively, the first developer, went under, in large part because of this project. The developer who's in possession of the rights in the project agreements today has an extremely difficult financial situation. They're heavily leveraged. They're having difficulty paying their debts. They have liquidated most of their ownership of completed buildings at Atlantic Yards. The map that Toby showed before of all of the buildings that are completed, the only ownership they have today is they have a part interest in the B5 building, but all of the rest have been sold. I think there are real questions about capacity, but I also think we have to kind of learn from what's happened up to this point and really be sure that the strategy of having a private party deck over the rail yards and put buildings on top of them works, because it doesn't look like it's working for the last two firms that have tried. I'm curious, has ESD done an independent analysis of the economic viability of having a private developer deck the rail yards? Do we know that that's still viable?
ESD hasn't carried out an independent financial analysis of the platform work. But to your point, Gabe, when you say a private developer, what's the alternative that you're proposing?
The alternative to a private developer, well, first of all, this project has moved ahead under single source agreements with Forest City Radnor, and effectively the agreement with Greenland is a single source agreement. They're the 95% owner in the rights in the project agreements. That's a lot of risk on one party, and it needs to be studied as whether or not, if there is no alternative to having a private developer, and it isn't economically possible for a private developer to do this on its own, we really have some very, very challenging questions to ask. The fact that we don't know if it's viable or not is not a reason to assume that it is.
Right, but are you, to your point, you're noting that if it's not viable for there to be a private developer, are you proposing there be other development partners? Are you proposing that there be a different structure of the deal? Like, what are you?
Certainly, having multiple development partners would spread the risk and would make the project more resilient to the kinds of things that have happened, for instance, in the Chinese market that are affecting the current developer. It also could be the case that the cost that we end up with for development over the rail yards is not one that can be borne by a project that's strictly privately financed, and we might need to see if there's an opportunity for some type of other subsidy other public subsidy that that would be necessary to close the gap.
You're here.
But we have to know if there's a gap, and it doesn't seem like we do.
In the past, ESD or its predecessor agencies have undertaken development projects where they provided the infrastructure and that reduced the cost of land and reduced the cost of development to the point where the housing that could be built on it was more affordable. So it links to the earlier project. Given the fact that we now have, on the federal level, money for infrastructure, maybe an opportunity that could take place, or the transit-oriented development grants that exist out there. All I'm saying is I think we should be looking at what are the various different options if and when there's a circumstance that arises. And what are these options that we might be able to use that could reduce the cost considerably. I remember when the whole Battery Park City was on the verge of going belly up and how they were able to quickly reorganize it and brought in Richard Kahn and a whole group of people that actually made that a profit-making entity. We chose at that time not to include the inclusionary housing on site because we were experiencing enormous abandonment in the late 70s and 80s, and so we opted that they use those subsidies to guarantee loans going to other areas. But today, in today's market, we should be able to do it on site. And I think it's something that ESD should be looking at what are the options and what happens if this occurs. What happens if, the Chinese government pulls the entire rug out of their entity, which they're a major owner here.
Yeah, I don't think this is a theoretical discussion. I mean, it's 2 years before the remedies hit, and either in some piece of this puzzle is going to change, and so we need information. We need to know what's viable and what can be done here. I don't see how else we'll be in a position to make decisions over the next couple of years that will have to be made.
So it sounds like, just to read out our discussion so far, for follow-up for the next meeting of the directors within the quarter, on or about July, as Director Tyus has given us the homework, we'll have a presentation and discussions from the MTA as well as the development team to talk about the ongoing discussions related to the platform and the conversation there. It also sounds like there needs to be a discussion about what the balance of the project, B5 through B10, as well as Site 5, the forecast of that would be and the viability of developing the balance of the project, as well as a conversation around the affordability requirements, noting the 2025 affordable housing deadline, as well as the balance of the 2,250 units that are due, and what that looks like at the project, given the fact that there is no 421A and that Affordable New York has expired as well, and what the conversations are around how it is that we deliver on the public benefits for the project at levels of affordability that are more reflective of what the stakeholders and the community are interested in seeing.
I think that's a good summary, and I would urge all directors to do some independent thinking and setting, before the next meeting as well, so we can have a, deeper conversation about it.
Is it possible that we can ask ESD to commission the type of feasibility analysis that will help inform our decisions about this project?
That's something that we'll take into consideration. There's complexities around the nature of the discussions that the developer is having with the MTA and the cost of construction for the platform, and also the developer's own the cost that has already gone into the permanent yards, but it's something that we can take into consideration in determining what the balance of the projects actually look like.
I mean, there are certainly professionals in New York City who can prepare such an analysis.
Sure, we'll take that into consideration. I am on cold. I'm sorry not to break professionalism, but it's freezing in here. I'm having a really hard time. My tea isn't helping. It's so cold.
One other point I'd like to raise, since it really is a virtual certainty that the affordable housing deadline cannot be met. And this was an important deadline, not just in terms of motivating the developer, but also in terms of actually providing affordable housing to a part of Brooklyn that's experiencing very significant displacement right now. If the deadline cannot be met through this project, if it's going to be unable to complete, I think we have an obligation to try to find another place to put the affordable housing that isn't going to get built in 2025 over the platform.
That's a very interesting point, and I think we welcome the discussions around the ideas that you might have on that. Again, the general project plan lays out what the current site is, and I don't know what that would look like to have the affordable housing elsewhere in Brooklyn or other parts of the community, but it's something that we can include as part of the discussion.
Yes.
I mean, there's an active discussion going on in that part of Brooklyn right now about upzoning Atlantic Avenue. There may be some opportunity for higher density there. I don't really know, but I think we have a moral obligation to deliver affordable housing.
If you do, though, traditionally, when it's off-site, it goes as a multiplier. So it's not 1-for-1 replacement, but it should be 2 to 3-for-1 replacement.
One site that pops up is the MTA land at Franklin Avenue and Atlantic, corner of Franklin and Atlantic.
Well, then we'll get into another negotiation with the MTA.
U.S. government-owned property.
One last question. One of the subjects discussed at our last board meeting was the urban room. I'd like to...
Before you jump to the urban room, can we stay on this for one
Thank you so much. What a gentleman.
There really is, I think, an opportunity here to begin to think about how we provide more affordable housing. And I think one of the ways is that we have to be cognizant of the governor's proposal that every county increase by 3% in the production of housing. So it's to the governor's benefit that we are able to put this project back on track or develop a mechanism by which we can start building affordable housing. This is a low-hanging fruit in a way because it's already been designated.
Yeah.
And so one of the things would be for ESD to go back to the governor's office to see if there are any other kinds of subsidies or incentives that could be provided in this situation.
Well, as the county representative, perhaps you can also inquire with the borough president's office.
I think it would be the borough president as well as the city of New York. I think we need to do all three. But the reality is that the governor is putting forth a very strong proposal, one that would transfer the obligation to localities. And I think it's a good proposal. I'm not in any way opposed to it. But here we have a situation which can be a project that should be moved along because it's in the making, and for it to falter because we don't provide it with the subsidies necessary to make it work may create a backlash to future development that could take place. If we could do it here, we could do it east of this site, and I think it's important that we begin to think about how we would do it here.
Thank you.
So,
Are there any other comments?
going back to the urban room, we had discussed the missed deadline for the urban room at our last board meeting. I'd just like to...
Can you remind us what the...
Yeah, the urban room is a glass atrium that was part of the project, and it, besides the affordable housing, it's the only other part of the project I'm aware of that actually had a hard deadline with liquidated damages for non-performance. It was envisioned as a public space, an indoor glass enclosed atrium where people could gather, have perhaps different kinds of performances and the like. It was supposed to be located at the base of a building that would have been directly in front of the arena. That building was intended originally to be built at the same time as the arena, but it was not because there was no market for a commercial office space in Brooklyn at the time that would get them the anchor tenant they needed. Nor I would observe today is there a market for such commercial office space in Brooklyn. But the deadline to complete the urban room was not contingent on the rest of the building. It was supposed to be done by May of last year, and of course it hasn't been started. The liquidated damages were $10 million to be collected over the course of a year. So I'd just like to understand if ESD has moved to collect the liquidated damages for the non-completion of the urban room.
No, as provided as a follow-up to the directors after the last meeting, ESD has not moved to collect the liquidated damages on the urban room. As Director Vacconi has stated, the urban room is intended to be a glass enclosure, which would be over what is currently the Arena Plaza, which has taken on a life of its own. And the developer has expressed interest in transferring the development bulk from B1, which is the building that is intended to be built over the plaza, to Site 5. And ESD is committed to looking at how to preserve the Arena Plaza as open space, as well as delivering additional open space elsewhere at the project site. But there hasn't been an action to move to collect those liquidated damages.
Has ESD waived the damages? Have they advised the developer that they're not that they don't intend to collect them and that they're not responsible?
The project documents have not changed, and so ESD has not waived that requirement. And at this time, again, the intention would be to preserve the Arena Plaza as public open space and to consider opportunities for improving open space at other portions of the project site.
All right, Toby, I have to observe that this agency was chartered to oversee public benefits at the Atlantic Yards project. And what you've just described is a decision by ESD to change the structure of project benefits at Atlantic Yards that has never been discussed with this board. We've never had any discussion at all about trading the urban room for something else. May I ask for the record?
I'd like to clarify that ESD isn't trading the urban room.
Yeah, I didn't hear that in Toby's remarks.
Okay. We haven't had a discussion that goes to the idea of preserving, of making, effectively sanctioning a change to the project agreements that involve not completing a part of the project plan for what is now the plaza area in order to preserve the plaza.
That's correct.
That question has never been debated here at the agency that's responsible for overseeing the public benefits of the project.
I'm not disputing that, and just to clarify again, there has been intention as part of the developer's publicly stated desire to transfer the bulk from B1 to Site 5. That would be part of the public review process for the proposed modifications to the general project plan. So those decisions have not been made by ESD. It would be subject to the public review process. The documents permit for ESD to have the option to collect and to issue notice regards to the liquidated damages, and that notice has not been issued yet. So that's the current status of where we are as it relates to the urban room.
So
and again, those discussions would be part of the full public review process related to any proposed modifications to the general project plan and to the project obligations.
Has EST considered any actions short of that, giving that kind of notice, whether it's just a reminder letter that those
I can assure you that the developer is well aware of its obligations.
Yeah, but in terms of making a record that shows that we, I mean, there doesn't sound to me like there's been any conduct that would constitute a waiver, and under ordinary contract principles, we would have 6 years probably from May of 2022 to bring actions on to collect those breach penalties.
But there was a hard deadline.
What's that?
I thought there was a hard deadline.
Well, there's a hard deadline for them to complete, and that's when the liquidated penalties. But their failure to pay those penalties and complete would seem, subject to opinion of agency counsel. I think that would be a breach of contract, and state statute of limitations for contract actions is 6 years. So we should be okay. We have time. We haven't waived anything.
So with respect to this idea of transferring the density from the arena block to Site 5 and doing an MGPP, I hesitate to ask, but is there any schedule for that right now? Is there a plan to when that process might begin?
That's a good question. I think he is wanting to be careful with my words so that it's not misconstrued. ESD is committed to carrying out a full public engagement process even before the start of the formal GPP process or whatever the necessary environmental review would be necessary for the proposed modifications, which would include opportunities for members of the public and key stakeholders to provide feedback on what's been developed at the site to date and also the balance of the project site as well. And so we're hopeful, as part of the long list of homework tasks that we've been provided for as a result of this meeting, to be able to come back to you either by the next meeting or in the coming months with a sense of what that public engagement could look like. We welcome the opportunity to have your feedback on what that could look like, be it engaging with our elected officials and key stakeholders on how it is that we speak to the public around what's been delivered at the site so far and what is due at the balance of it. So the timing, I think, will be informed by discussions that we have with the AYCDC directors, informed by the discussions that we have with elected officials, and wanting to be in a position to get and collect as much public feedback that informs what the MGPP process looks like as well.
But
I don't want to sit here and give a time, and so if we can commit to the July meeting to have the developer and the Long Island Railroad present, but I think it'll be important for us to hold these conversations in the context of the status of what's happening at the project site.
Right. I just want to unpack that your statement, though, make sure I understood it correctly. So an MGPP process hasn't been initiated yet because that would require a plan, and the plan would be the product of the community engagement exercise that you mentioned. Is it this developer's intention to participate in that process? Is this developer going to solicit, be a part of soliciting community input and then developing a plan? Is it? Because typically MGPPs start with the developer's plan, not the public's plan.
That's the expectation.
And so the developer then I guess has some say in when that process begins.
I don't think the developer has some say, but would be involved as part of the discussions. I don't. When you say has say, you make it seem that that's informing what the public feedback would be.
No, I'm just trying to figure it out, because what I thought I heard you say was ESD wants to start a public engagement process, but that process hasn't started yet.
That's correct.
So what is necessary for ESD to begin the public engagement process? Maybe that's the question.
That's a good question, and we're happy to have a discussion with the directors about what that public engagement process looks like, what the forms of meetings are. I know about a year and a half ago at this point, there were public engagement sessions, which you were a part of, that sought public feedback on the balance of the project site and what visioning the future of Atlantic Yards could be. And there's a lot of consideration to what does that mean? Are those open community charrettes? Are those led by a facilitator? Are those led by elected officials? There's a lot of different questions that we're happy to talk through what that public engagement will look like. And it's also, I think, important that we're able to provide an update on what the status of work at the platform is, and what the timing is for the work of the platform as well. So there are various moving pieces to this, and I think it's important, if we were to move ahead with those discussions and those public engagement efforts, that we're able to answer questions and provide as much details as possible, which is where the discussions that the developer will have will be involved. But I want to be clear that this isn't informed by the developer singularly. Yes, Dr. Schiffman.
Given the dramatic changes in the real estate market that have evolved because of COVID and the inflationary, the response to the inflation, and the impact on the bond markets, is it at this point in time any benefit to the community to discuss Site 5, or should we hold that in reserve for a period of time where we may be able to understand the marketplace and the development needs of the borough at a better point?
That's a good question. I mean, the project's outside completion date is 2035, and so, if as a result of these project discussions there are questions around timing or phasing of the project, those are all things that we can take into consideration.
To me, it would be more important to deal with the affordability and the completion of the platform and not tie this to that, because there may be other options that will emerge in the future. It may be that we don't need the kind of density and development at the core of downtown Brooklyn that after we've seen all the development that's taken place and the dramatic changes in the market, which we really can't predict at this point.
That's an interesting idea, and I think, again, something that could be included as part of the public discussions, and we'll be able to take that into the larger context of where things are at the project site.
Where does the condemnation process stand on Site 5?
That's a good question, and I can't recall at this point now when we provided the update, but the developer has development team has resolved the litigation with PC Richards, and so the actions related to Site 5 have been completed, both the Models and the PC Richards parcel.
But the state started the process of moving to
Right, and
the
then
domain
there was
process.
litigation that was brought against the development team, or the part of the development team, and so that litigation has been resolved, or the challenge has been resolved, and it's allowed for there to be a path forward on Site 5. So the developer and PC Richards have an agreement in place, and that makes for there to be a path forward on considering what would be developed at Site 5.
But has the state moved forward to actually take ownership of those?
As a result of, sorry if I'm not being clear, as a result of the resolution, there's an agreement between the developer and PC Richards that doesn't require condemnation.
Oh, doesn't require
of the site.
Got it. Okay.
Of the PC Richards site.
Is the MTA also part of those conversations?
The MTA, are you referring to like the 4th Avenue and exit on, the city has been in discussions with, the developer has been in discussions with the city as it relates to any agreements necessary for Site 5. But specific to what was delaying the injunction and the discussions related to the PC Richards site, those have been resolved.
Just returning to public engagement here for a minute, if we can. To start a public engagement process, really, what would be necessary would be to form a steering committee and hire a facilitator. Is there some? I just think it's helpful to understand what actions would need to take place before those things could happen. If the intention is really to, move ahead with re-envisioning the rest of the project.
Sure, we can think through that some more. I don't have an answer for you at this moment, but we can think through that some more and come back to you for additional feedback in defining maybe what the scope of work of the facilitator could be, or what the form of that public engagement could look like.
I mean, I think if we're going to talk about it as something that's going to happen in the future and that other things are predicated upon, we should have an idea of what's necessary to begin it. And if Ron said if right now it's not the right economic environment to do it, we could consider that as well. But it seems like we might be saying, these are things we expect to happen in the future, but they're not ready yet, and we don't know when they're going to be ready. And I think at this stage, with all of, as you mentioned, and I absolutely agree, there are a lot of moving parts, but at some point we have to start, attaching some of them to the floor.
Understood.
Are there any other questions or comments from directors? I had just a quick question on the quality of life meetings. What's your typical attendance at those?
They range. The last 2 meetings have had about like 20 or so. Sometimes we've had 10.
Zoom, and that's
those
on Zoom?
Those are Zoom, yeah. And sometimes it might be only 10 participants.
How is that compared to back when they were being held in person?
You're asking me a question that's going to require me to.
I don't need it. I'm just rough.
I
More
think
or less.
sometimes more, I think, via Zoom, because there's more accessible. As we can all imagine, scheduling for this meeting, especially, it's easier, and it allows for folks to be able to meet.
But it's subject to, of course, the digital divide.
Yeah, exactly. But and then in person, this was when there wasn't consideration of there even being an alternative. And I think some of the in-person meetings attendance would depend on maybe the scale of activity that was happening on site, or if there were specific issues that folks may have interest in and wanting to discuss. And so there's benefit for considering the fully virtual option for quality of life meetings moving forward.
Okay.
This is just one thing on the subject of meetings. Two things. First, great to have in-person meetings. Happy to come to an in-person meeting with all of the directors here and meet you all. But is it possible for us to hold these meetings in Brooklyn again?
That's a good question.
We did have them at one point.
It's true, we did.
Excuse me, we did. As you all could know, we're all getting our few minutes of fame here. ESD's meetings are subject to open meetings law, which means that they have to be, live streamed and webcast, and the video captured at the same time. And we've run into some technological difficulties when we've been off-site at different meeting locations. And so it's something that we can explore and consider if there are locations that you can suggest that are able to meet those technological requirements. But right now we have a team in place that helps us at the ESD offices to facilitate the technology necessary to both capture this meeting, live stream it, and record it at the same time. But we can consider locations in Brooklyn if they're able to provide that technology.
I'm trying to recall, it was when we met at LIU. Did they have live streaming?
They
can't have our meetings there anymore.
Yeah.
Why is that?
They just said that they weren't going to.
And so we
not
did.
like
We
we
also
trashed
had
the room
a
or
meeting at Brick Studios, but we had run into some technological limitations there. So we'll consider it, happen to explore it, but wanting to make sure that we're all able to be accessible per the webcasting requirements we're holding in the ESU offices.
The second question about meetings, it has been a while since we've had one of these meetings. I understand that there's been some difficulty in obtaining quorum to schedule the meeting. Do we have to look at our bylaws to see if we need to make some adjustment there so we can meet? I mean, right now, we're going to need, I suggest that over the next couple of years, we're going to need to meet more frequently.
Absolutely. I think, frankly, more fruitful than bylaws would be just for directors to really try to be flexible in their scheduling when a meeting request goes out, to look at your calendar, and if you have a conflict, consider, as I personally did with respect to this meeting, whether you can move something in order to enable your attendance.
We'll forecast, as we've done in the past. I'll coordinate with Debbie and we'll send around some dates that would make it easier for you to be able to plan your schedules around. Again, we recognize that you're here on a volunteer basis and have other professional and personal commitments, so we do thank you for making yourselves available, and we'll do our part to be able to follow up with you. I'm happy to call everyone and send out follow-up emails to work with your availability, be it for morning meetings or afternoon meetings. We'll also take into consideration the request for meetings in Brooklyn as well, and look into making sure that we have a space that can support the technology needed to webcast the meetings. So be on the lookout for us for dates, at least through the end of the calendar year, so that you have something to prepare for as you plan your own personal schedules.
If we developed an annual calendar, it would be a lot easier to plan.
We've done that. We've done that in the past, and we'll provide dates through the end of the year so that you can plan in advance.
So it sounds like we're only going to have 2 more meetings this year.
No, we will meet as necessary. The first one being on or before July, as you've tasked us with.
Preferably before July, because we're going to get into the summer months and vacations and stuff. So hopefully we can schedule it at least by the end of June.
Okay, so I think that concludes our corporate update portion of the meeting. We now have an opportunity for members of the public to provide comments. Is there anyone in attendance, either in person or online, who would wish to make any public comments, either on any agenda items or any non-agenda items? All right. Are we aware of anyone who's submitted a request?
Yeah, we haven't
Haven't received any requests. Okay, so then.
Excuse me, so there were no public comments? No, thank you.
Okay. Then I think that means that is there any new business or anything that hasn't been said thus far that anyone wants to raise?
I had one concern, and that was the lottery system and the timing of the lottery occurring in such a way that the market rate families move in, and it takes months before any of the subsidized families or the affordable units become available. Is there a way of making sure in the future that the lottery takes place and that people can move into the building simultaneously rather than move in separately.
That's a good point. The developer has been in coordination with HPD, which is the agency that approves the lottery and the marketing materials, and so we'll be sure to follow up on the necessary discussions to improve on the timing of it.
How long a time lag has there typically been?
Simultaneously.
How long
sorry?
a time lag has there typically been? Do you know?
I don't know. But
I can't recall now what the timing for the previous lotteries are, but it's something that we can look into. There is a timing of when the developer is able to submit their application to HPD for consideration. Off the top of my head, I want to say it's usually 9 months before you expect to receive your first TCOs, but please don't quote me on that. We'll do the necessary homework and can have the discussions about improving on the timing for the lottery applications moving forward.
And just to be clear, your concern in that regard is with regard to sort of, for lack of a better word, dignity
Yes.
differences?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so unless there's anyone has any further business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I think all approve. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I was